Hello, folks. This is Chuck Fink, and you're listening to WPVM FM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 1037 on your dial, and globally at WPVMFM.org. I'm Chuck Fink, your host of Storyville, and you can listen to us every Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And today, oh boy, today, I think you all are going to really have a great time. My guest is Michael Reno Harrell. He's an award winning songwriter, a published author, a nationally known storyteller, and, if that's not enough, a visual artist. To say the least, Michael is rather creative. He hails from the southern Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, not too far from Asheville, where all those things are so much a part of life is his breathing. Michael's talents in these arts have taken him to 44 states, several foreign countries, over his 53-year career. And Michael, you don't look a day over 55. His work is
That's
based
where I
on
started with this too.
his work is based on his life experiences to reflect the culture of his mountain roots, which go back 8 generations. Whoa. But Michael's stories, songs, and artwork reflect not only the Southern experience, but truly the American story. His work, in whatever forms it takes, all comes down to just one thing, and we call that story. Michael, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Chet. It's great to be here.
Do you mind if we get started with one of your pieces so that our audience can get a little taste of Michael Reno Harrell?
Well, I thought I'd just do a little song about where you and I live.
Go for it.
Pinto beans with onions in them, cornbread and tea with lemon, conversations with southern women, and Sunset Beach at dawn. Dirt road dust between your toes, okra grows and long green rows and 50-foot coils of garden hose stretched out across the lawn. Flowers bloom in coffee cans, wipe your feet and wash your hands, hide and seek and kick the can, cheer wine and sun drop, Appalachian mist, Atlantic spray, Harley Davidson, Chevrolet, red, white, and blue with a touch of gray, and small towns up on blocks. The sun comes up from the deep blue sea and sets somewhere over Tennessee. Right there in the middle's where I want to be, Caroline. Listen to the wind high in the trees. You hear that voice calling on the breeze. Does she call to you like she calls to me, Caroline? Piano in the living room, Bible school the first week of June, Union Grove and fiddle tunes, Rock of Ages and Chimney Rock, black dirt, red dirt, rocky, sandy, Barney, Opie, Aunt B, Andy, moonshine and homemade candy, Earl and Merle and Doc. The sun comes up from the deep blue sea and sets somewhere over Tennessee. Right there in the middle's where I want to be, Caroline. Listen to the wind high in the trees. You hear that voice calling on the breeze. Does she call to you like she calls to me, Caroline? Winston-Salem, Lucky Strike, Bull Durham, Orville, Wilbur Wright, the Hatteras, and the Brown Mountain Lights, Dogwoods and Southern Pines, outrageous Blue Ridge Parkway views, Outer Banks and barbecue, all these things and me and you, Caroline. The sun comes up from the deep blue sea and sets somewhere over Tennessee. Right there in the middle's where I want to be, Caroline. Listen to the wind high in the trees. You hear that voice calling on the breeze. Does she call to you like she calls to me, Caroline?
right. Yeah. Oh, great stuff. I got to tell you, I'm a former Buckeye, but after
Oh yeah.
moving here, I'm a definite Tar Heel. Oh, Michael.
Where are
And
you
by the
from
way,
in Ohio?
I'm
Where are you
sorry,
from in Ohio? Where are you from in Ohio?
Cincinnati.
Oh, well, you just barely in Ohio.
We're just north of the Mason-Dixon line. You got
Just
it.
barely across the river.
You got it. Kentucky. We can see Kentucky from downtown Cincinnati.
That's right.
And Michael, I just want to let our audience know that the gentleman that you're seeing on our screen is considered, and I consider him, one of the best storytellers in the country, if not the world. He is highly acclaimed. He is so respected, and he's in demand. And I don't want to oversell him, but Michael, you're my hero.
Well, that you're a sad man. But thank you for saying that. We've been awful lucky over the years.
Yeah. Well, let's get started here. I realize that you grew up around this area. You grew up around Asheville. Tell me a little bit about your family history.
Well, I grew up around Asheville, but only on weekends and summers because my dad moved us to East Tennessee the year I was born, and I was raised in a little town called Morristown, Tennessee. But every other Friday during the school year, when I would get out of school, that red and white DeSoto would be sitting out front and already packed to go because we were going home. My mother lived in Tennessee for probably a total of 50 some years, and it was never home. Home was always Western North Carolina. So we'd get in that car and drive, back then before I-40, we'd drive to Newport, and from Newport to Del Rio and across the mountain to Hot Springs and across the river again and across another mountain to Madison County and up to West Asheville and then out to where we're from in Pole Creek in Buncombe County. But yeah, I grew up, all my good times were in North Carolina. I've always been I tell people I was conceived in North Carolina and born in Tennessee, so I'm bilingual.
That's a great way of putting it. And you just talked about the road from Newport to Asheville. Every time
Yeah.
you go to Ohio and come back, that's the road we take because it's so beautiful. You
Yeah.
parallel the French Broad River. You have the mountains all around you. It's a state route. I think it's Route 25.
It
Oh,
used to, when I was a kid, it was 3 hours and usually about 45 minutes from home to home. And now it's about an hour and 25 minutes because of
exactly.
I-40, because all the buses and as my mother called them, transfer trucks were on that same route. You did good to average 35 miles an hour, on that old route back in the day.
Wow, that's a lot different now.
A lot different.
Yeah. So your family is from both North Carolina, and you also spent a lot of time in Tennessee. Was there
Yeah.
storytelling in your family?
No, there wasn't. Neither one of my parents were storytellers. My mom's dad was quite a storyteller by all accounts, but he died before I was born. His name was Ed Cole. He was quite a character in his own right. Everybody called him Motorcycle Eddie Cole because he had the first Indian motorcycle in that part of the world. People thought he was crazy, and I guess he probably was a little bit, riding a hardtail motorcycle around those old roads in those days. But there was, when I say there wasn't storytelling per se, as we think of storytelling today in my family. Of course, we had family anecdotes like everybody does. Remember that time, that sort of thing. But my real interest in the story got, my mother was a voracious reader. And my brother and I were both very slow readers. So when, it would be Sunday night or, late Sunday, and my mother would say, "Now, do you have everything ready for school on Monday?" And you go, "Well, I haven't finished my book report." And she'd say, "Well, why haven't you finished it?" And I'd say, or my brother would say, "Because we hadn't finished the book." She'd say, "Come on." And she'd get, Call of the Wild or something and set us down. And she would read to us, and she could read faster orally than we could read, to ourselves. So pretty soon, all our book reports, we'd bring home a book and say, "Okay, Mom, here's what." So every night after supper, she would read us 3 or 4 chapters, And she was like a storyteller in that respect. And I think that's where I really got my love of story, was from all those wonderful authors that she would, Treasure Island and all those things.
Was
The first book
I'm
the
sorry.
first book I ever read that I really enjoyed was The Old Man and the Sea.
Hemingway.
Yeah.
So is all this taking place in Morristown, Tennessee?
Yeah.
Reason
Yeah.
I ask is,
But then
yeah, go ahead.
when I say that there wasn't real storytelling in our family, my grandfather's best friend was an old man by the name of Stover Mason, and I've got a lot of Stover stories that I've told over the years. Now, Stover told stories. He didn't tell jack tales or any of that sort of thing, but he told real stories about the adventures that, because I would pull things out of him. How was it in 18, he was born in 1878. How was it at the turn of the century? When did you see the first airplane? Where did you see it? That sort of thing. He said, Stover was 25 when the Wright brothers came. He was an adult, and he and I sat together in 1969, and he watched Neil Armstrong step on the moon. I thought he knew everything that had ever happened in the world. So Stover was a good storyteller, and that was, nobody told jack tales or anything like that in my family, or folk tales.
Yeah, I'm kind of like you. I really like the personal narrative, the personal story. It just resonates more with me. Not that there's anything wrong with jack
No,
tales or fairy tales. It's good for kids. It's
well,
good for a
not
lot of people.
people.
But
The reason that personal stories became so popular is because not many people at a storytelling festival ever killed a dragon, but everybody had a bicycle wreck. So, personal stories didn't start in professional storytelling until the mid 90s.
huh,
They were all folk tales until then.
huh.
And then one day at the National Storytelling Festival, this lady got up and told a story about her mom. And then from it just caught on.
I never knew
But
that. So that's where
but
it
until
started.
then it was all folk tales pretty much
So,
until the mid 90s. Yeah,
Michael, how did you
25
jump
years.
into storytelling? Your family didn't tell many stories. You were talking about the gentleman that you got to hang around with and got to hear some stories. But what made you go from whatever you were doing into storytelling?
I was on the road. I've been a folk singer, since the first time I got paid was 1963. So I've been at this a long time. I was on tour in Texas back in the early 2000s. I can't remember exactly when, but I was on tour in Texas. I'd done a concert, I think maybe for the Houston Folk Society or something. Came back to my hotel room. It was late at night on Saturday night. I got that little card, to see where PBS was, thinking maybe Austin City Limits would be on or something. So I found PBS and I turned that on, and it wasn't Austin City Limits. It was this little gray-haired lady standing in a yellow and white striped tent on a stage, talking about having to take piano lessons from cousin somebody in a little town called Thomasville, Alabama. And I was just mesmerized by it. And I kept going, she's in a tent somewhere talking to these people. And of course, the audience was just, enraptured by her work. And at the end of it, it said, "You've been watching excerpts from the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee." I'd never heard of it. I grew up 53 miles from that tent and had never heard of the National Storytelling Festival. So I called my wife, Joan, who's been my manager and agent for 20 some years, 26 years, I guess now.
Michael, let me interrupt for a second. You married
Sure.
up. Go ahead.
Oh, I did. I called her, and it was, I don't know what time it was at home, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. She answered the phone. "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Find out when the National Storytelling Festival is. It's in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And whenever it is, whatever we got booked, cancel it because we're going there." And she said, "Okay," and hung up the phone. And so the next year we went, and I went to, I guess it was probably Courthouse, tent. And I had my program, got there early. Catherine Wyndham, I think, was going to be on. Maybe her first set was third set on Friday. And of course, there's split sets on Friday. So I had to sit there through 5 storytellers before the only person I went to see came on. And I'm looking at my program going, "Oh God, a guy with a moose puppet. I got to sit through this." And so, of course, I sat through 5 storytellers. And by the time that Catherine got on, I went, "It's amazing that there are other people that are that good." And of course, what, you're at the National Storytelling Festival, you fool. Of course there are other, but it was I had no idea. I had met David Holt in 1969 when he first came to East to find out about our culture and the music and the stories of our culture. I met him at the Asheville Mountain Dance and Folk Festival. Mm-hmm. And we became friends. And over the years, we wrote songs together. We wrote the title song for one of his records together. We wrote a bunch of songs together. And he kept saying, this was before I'd seen Catherine, he kept saying, man, you ought to get into storytelling. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I knew he did a lot of school programs and things. And I said, well, I don't know anything about kids. I've never had kids. He said, no, it's really more about adults, you know, telling stories to adults. And I just didn't get it until I saw it. And then I called David and I said, I might give this a try. Can you give me any advice? And he gave me 2 pieces of advice. He said, now you're going to have to do some kids. He said, they won't be in the festivals if you get to the festival level, but at the festivals, before the festival, a lot of times they'll put you in the schools and you'll need to be able to talk to kids. I said, what do I do with kids? And he said, don't talk down to them and say underwear. And those were the 2 best pieces of advice I ever got.
Oh, that's great. So David Holt, by the way, my previous guest just on the show was Gwenda Ledbetter. And she also spoke of David Holt getting her started in storytelling. So David Holt has just been a rock for all of us storytellers.
David Holt has done more to preserve and promote the culture of our mountains than anybody ever born here. I've said that my whole life, and it's true. David was born in Texas and raised in California. He was a rock and roll drummer when I met him. But by golly, oh my gosh, nobody has come close to doing what David Holt has done for us.
Oh, wow.
He got me on the National Storytelling Festival. He and Andy Offit Irwin. I'm not supposed to say that, but that's.
And what year was that?
And I met both of them through music.
And what year was that?
I met David in '69. I met Andy sometime, I would think, in the late '90s, because there used to be a concert series in Salty in the mountains of North Georgia that was on Georgia Public Radio. It was called The Evening Star, and the MC was this guy named Andy Offit Irwin, and Andy would come on to warm up the audience and tell about a 10 or 12 minute story about his aunt.
I've heard those so many times. He was here in Weaverville.
Well, I did that series about 4 times, and Andy and I became great friends. And then I was on the road, and there was a concert series in Gold Hill in Georgia, north of Atlanta. And the guy who did it said, I'm going to get this guy to open for you that'll bring in some people that maybe don't know who you are. And so Andy came in and opened a show for me. And Andy went to bat for me later on. And Susan O'Connor, who does the National Story, who runs she's in charge over there. He called Susan and said, you need to hire this guy. And she said, is he any good? And Andy said, I've opened for him.
Wow.
That's what he and David Holt are the reason I have a career.
So how old were you when you started storytelling?
How old was I?
Yeah.
It was in the first time I was at the National, I think, was 2008.
Wow.
So yeah, I've only been in it 13 years, 14 years.
I am impressed. I've started this in 2012, and my aspirations are quite a bit lower, and my talent is quite a bit lower. But to see how far you've come in a short period of time is really something.
Well, the thing about it is, David knew that I was a storyteller because he told me when I would say, I don't know what you're talking about. Why would you think I was a storyteller? He said, because your introductions are longer than your songs. See, I was, the way I got started was the folk scare, as we call it, the early 60s, you know. Well, about 64, the Beatles came along and folk music just died, just like thump, you know. I mean, it was still out there, but it was now sort of underground. It was like bluegrass or something. You didn't hear it on the radio anymore. So the only place that I knew to play music was in bars and in restaurants. So I played seafood restaurants in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina, and knife and gun clubs in Newport, Tennessee. I mean, I played anywhere they'd have me. And of course, they wanted to hear what they was on the jukebox sitting right beside me, you know. We want to hear, you know, Jimmy Buffett or John Prine or whatever they liked, you know, George Jones, whatever. And I kept trying to sing my original songs, and I could sneak one in now and then. And I finally figured out maybe if I tell people the story about the song, they'll be more interested to listen to it. And that's when I discovered that it's like in our DNA to listen to people tell stories.
So
You know,
let me
so
dig into that.
I could quieten down a bar by starting to tell a story about going fox hunting with Stover Mason and Sam Burton. And then as soon as I'd get through telling the story and start playing the song, they'd go back to talking to each other. And I'm
Here's
like,
a,
the daggone stories are more powerful than the songs are.
well, let me ask you a question
But
about the
again,
conversion. So
I'm sorry.
let me ask you a question about your conversion, and that is, when did you become aware of the fact you could make a living off of doing this? When did you become aware of professional storytelling? You know, like,
Well,
did you pay for it?
when I went to the National Storytelling Festival and found out that there were all these people, that there were other storytelling festivals is the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've always equated being a national teller to being in a national bluegrass band,
Mm-hmm.
because almost all the work is festival work. And by the same token, because it's festival work, you're always working with other tellers. There's a camaraderie among those of us who do this because it's a small group,
Mm-hmm.
really, the people who travel and do that. But it's almost all festival work. You know, there's not a lot of house concerts and that sort of thing for storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you're pretty much going to have to be, you know, if you want to travel and now, when you say make a living at it, there are very few of us who make our living at storytelling. There's Donald Davis and Bill Lipp and a few people that make their total living at storytelling. There just isn't enough work. Almost all of us, and it's that way in most mid-level and even upper-level bluegrass bands. Almost everybody else does something else. I'm a folk singer and a storyteller, so I can stay busy. You know, we used to do close to 200 gigs a year. I can stay busy doing that, but I do the same act in either place. I just play songs and tell stories. In the folk music world, I'm that guy that tells stories. And in the storytelling world, I'm that guy that plays songs. You
So
know,
you're the true crossover artist.
well, me and John McCutcheon and David Holt, and yeah, there are a lot. Kim Whitecamp, there are a lot of us who are. Kim is a great keynote speaker, and she does a lot of corporate work, and she has a store, you know, where she lives in Ohio. Andy teaches at Emory, you know. A lot of us do other things as well. It's you know, think about the average national teller. You do about 10 festivals a year. You can't make a living on 10 weekends a year.
No, no.
You know, now, Donald claims he does 42 festivals a year. I told that to David Holt. He said, God, I didn't know there were 42, you know, but yeah. And a lot of us teach, we do workshops, you know, those sorts of things. So,
Well,
I mean, it's
let me bring up a name that we both
sure.
know really well, and I think we both have a deep place in our heart for this gentleman, David Joe Miller. And if
Yeah.
I could start it out by just saying that 2012, I mentioned earlier, is when I got started. 2013, I was telling a story at a restaurant, and it was on patriotism and my view of patriotism. And in the audience was David Joe and Robin, and I'd never met them before, but afterwards they came up, and Robin was effusive, and David Joe just said, I like your work. And from that, he was able to provide the stage for me. He was almost like not only a mentor, but a booking agent. And and he's from Jonesboro, so you also have a storyteller producer who's from Jonesboro. And I got to tell you, I love David Joe and Robin, and they're just wonderful people. So I've said my piece. How about yours?
I think David Joe Miller has done more to promote storytelling in our area than almost anybody else. You know, he was very instrumental in starting the Jonesboro Guild, which is, you know, put live storytelling every week in Jonesboro, Tennessee for these many years. My younger brother is a member of that guild. I've worked for David, I don't know how many times. I've done around Asheville, I've done probably at least 5 or 6 shows for him. Uh, he's a great storyteller and a great promoter. But David is like so many people. Here's how almost all storytelling festivals work. 2 librarians go to Jonesboro and say, "Wow, our town needs this." And they go home and they don't know how to put on a festival, but they figure it out and they get money and they get all those things and they do all the work, and they do that. And they do it again next year, and they do it again the next year, and they create a staff of volunteers. I almost never in the storytelling world work for anybody who's trying to make any money off what I do. All they want to do is make enough money to do it again next year and to treat the storytellers like they're somebody. They pay us well, they take care of us, they buy us airplane tickets, they feed us, and they don't make a cent. They don't keep a penny. And David Joe Miller is one of those people. It's the love of storytelling, not only of being a storyteller, but promoting storytelling, that makes people like David Joe and so many other people across this country crucial to those of us who tell stories.
And he's so generous. And by the
Oh,
way,
yeah.
I think
Plus he's fun.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
And he knows all the good places to eat.
I think I saw you at the Weaverville Library a few years ago.
I
And
was there.
and I also saw Andy Offit Irwin there. And then I was pleased to be invited to tell there. And David Joe was in the front row harassing me the entire time, which made for such a good story.
Well, you know, they have a condo in Jonesboro. So anytime we're playing the Down Home in Johnson City, he'll call me up and say, "Hey, the key's in the mailbox, stay." So anytime we're in East Tennessee without a place to stay, they've always opened that place for us. They've just, you know, their hospitality is just incredible. I've stayed at their house in Asheville, you know. Or in
Yes, yes. What's the old saying? My Southern parents used to say, he's got a heart like a hotel, room for everybody.
Yeah, I love that.
So, Michael, let's talk more about your mentors and who are they? What kind of advice did you get from your mentors?
Well, David has been a great mentor to me. Ed Snotter, Ed Snotter at the Down Home in Johnson City is who I was thinking about. But Ed Stivender is everybody's mentor. Ed Stivender, the first time I did a Midnight Cabaret at Jonesboro, they asked me to do the Midnight Cabaret. I said, sure. So I called Ed and I said, "Ed, what do I need to do?" He said, "What night have you got?" I said, "Saturday." He went, "Ooh." I said, "Why?" I thought that would be the big night. He said, "Think about it. Everybody got there on Thursday. They're all talking to their friends and hanging out at the hotels and bread and breakfast with their buddies that they hadn't seen in a year. Then they get up early the next morning, they go to breakfast, then they sit in those tents all day long. And then they stay up and they see ghost stories, and then they go see the Midnight Cabaret on Friday. And then they're up on Saturday morning doing the same thing. By Saturday night, they're dead." He said, "About an hour in, you got to wake them up somehow." I said, "Okay." And so what I did was I went around to every one of my storytelling buddies that weekend and said, "I've got Saturday Night Cabaret. Will you come? We're going to get up on the stage and sing a song together." And the pit was full of storytellers. I think we had 15 or 16 of us on the stage singing "If I Had a Hammer." And got the audience to sing. And then there was always an after party on Saturday night, on Saturday night. And, on Sunday night. There's always an after party, a lot of time at Joseph Sobel's house. And me and Joan and Waddy Mitchell and Lisa, his wife Lisa, were walking up together. We walked up on the front porch of the house, and Ed was sitting out on the porch in a straight back chair leaning against the wall. And we all said hey to Ed, and I held the door open, and the other 3 walked in, and Ed looked at me and said, "You got a minute?" And I said, "Sure." He gave me a 12-minute critique on everything I did that night and pointed out everything that he thought worked and why I should use it again. All those things, extremely helpful. And so Ed Stivender, and I'm not the only one. He's that way with everybody. Ed's love for storytelling and his knowledge is just vast, and his coaching is priceless. So I would say Ed, and then, just, all the people, all the fans. That's what keeps you going. That's what makes you dig.
Well, I got to ask you, since you're
Bill
talking
Lepp's been
about,
a big help.
I'm sorry?
Bill Lepp's been a big help.
Oh, yes.
Bill and I met. We both did Jonesboro Days together. He had just done the national festival. He had been a New Voice that previous year. We both did Jonesboro Days. There was a dinner at the Visitor Center where you pick up your tickets. Mm-hmm. Bill got up and told stories. I had not been to the national festival yet, but I was working on stories because I wanted to get there. I'd seen Catherine and I'd been to the festival, and I told the story I tell about cherry bombs, about blowing up the mailbox. I told that and something else early on. And so afterwards, Bill and I were talking, and I said, "Man," I said, what all are you doing?" He said, I just do campgrounds in West Virginia. That's all I do. Campgrounds in West Virginia. I tell stories at campgrounds, state campgrounds. I said, "Have you got a website?" He said, "No." So we became friends that night, and we've worked together 150 times since then. But Bill's it's not advice, but it's inspiration, because Bill he keeps a record of what he tells at every set, at every festival, so that when you go back the next time, you're not telling the same stories over. He's taught me just inadvertently about just hanging around him, so many things that have been important.
Well, Michael,
Just keep your
let me
eyes
ask
open.
you a favor here. You're talking about your mentors and the advice they give you. Can you give us a sample, maybe a byproduct of all that advice by sharing a story, a song with us now?
Sure, I'd love to. I'll do one. I'll tell you a little bit about my dad. My dad is from Mitchell County, and we know where that is, but a lot of people don't. I tell people you've probably heard of Mount Mitchell, the tallest mountain east of the Rockies. Well, that's not in Mitchell County, but at least you know basically where I'm talking about. You can see Mitchell County from Mount Mitchell. My dad didn't grow up in the mountains. His dad moved their family to Spartanburg, South Carolina in 1925 when my dad was 5 years old, and went to work in a cotton mill. And my dad grew up in a mill village in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And about the time he came of age, the Great Depression came along. And he grew up in a mill town in Spartanburg, South Carolina in the Great Depression, when my grandfather was working one half a shift a week. They kept people on for that much, just to do maintenance and things if they didn't have anything else to do, just so they could keep the company housing and they could keep their families together and they could keep their operators there. Well, my dad went to work in the cotton mill when he graduated high school at 17 years old, and he didn't like it. Imagine that. Times had gotten a little better by the end of the 30s. So in 1937, my dad was walking home with his dad one night, and he looked at his dad and said, "Dad, I don't want to do this. I'm going to go look for something better." And my grandfather looked at my dad and said, "Do that, because that's what I was doing when I brought us here, looking for a better life." So my dad joined the Navy. Now, having grown up in that blackwater country down there, where the rivers are so black with cypress runoff that you can't see an inch below the surface, people didn't go swimming in that water because there were snakes in that water called cottonmouths, and you can't see them. So my dad had never learned to swim. So when he went to the Navy, he was in boot camp in Great Lakes up there, and they said, "Do you swim?" And he said, "No." And they said, "Well, you're going to learn." And of course, they threw him in a swimming pool and taught him how to swim. And then he was stationed in Pearl Harbor. 1937, when he got out of boot camp, he was stationed in Pearl Harbor on the USS Yorktown aircraft carrier. Now, a lot of you probably know right offhand, the Yorktown sunk at Midway. Well, guess what? My dad got out in September. His tour was over. in September of 1941 before December 7th, 1941.
Wow.
So he had this old buddy, shipmate, who lived in Worcester, Massachusetts, and his whole family worked at a place called Norton Machine Works, big machinist company up there. And he got my dad a job up there. And my dad took the job, called for my mom down here, or called for, sent her a telegram. They'd been dating, and we've got all their letters my mom kept tied up for years in a pink bow, pink ribbon. They fell in love basically through the mail. My dad had met her in the mountains of western North Carolina when he came there with his dad to visit his uncle. Saw my mom at church and talked her into letting him walk her home, that deal, you know. Anyway, as all your listeners know, early on in the war, we were keeping England alive with convoys running across the North Atlantic, because we knew that if we were ever going to invade the continent over there, that we had to have some place to springboard from, and that had to be England. So we were keeping England alive, and the German U-boats were just creating havoc. There were a lot of convoys that would sink half the ships in it. They'd start out with 100 ships and 50 would make it. We were losing Liberty ships faster than we could build them. So they were begging for anybody with any sea experience to join the Merchant Marine. So my mom had just moved there, and they'd gotten married, and he came home from work one day and said, "I've quit my job." And my mother went, "Why?" He said, "I'm joining the Merchant Marine." She didn't like the idea, but she was patriotic and she stood by her man. And my dad joined the Merchant Marine, and they sent him to OCS, and he became an officer and ran convoys across the North Atlantic for the rest of the war. I didn't know anything about that other than I'd seen his Liberty Medal in my mother's cedar chest. And I asked her what this was. She said, "Your dad that's what he did in the war. He was in the Merchant Marine." I didn't even know what that was. Well, years later, I was about 8 or 10 years old. The first time we ever went to the beach, we went to Curie Beach, North Carolina. My brother and I were having a ball. We were out traipsing around in the water and splashing and throwing things and having a big time. And my dad and my mom were sitting up under a beach umbrella. And my mom said, "Come on up, boys, it's time for lunch." And she had sandwiches made. She offered a sandwich to my dad. My dad said, "No, I think I'll go for a swim." And he picked up my mother's white rubber bathing cap. You remember those?
Sure. Yeah.
Put it on and snapped it and waded out into the surf and dove under a wave and swam out past the breakers and turned right and started swimming south. And my brother and I just watched that white bathing cap bobbing along out there, just going till it went out of sight. And we looked at Mom and said, "Where's Dad going?" And she looked at me and she said, "For a swim." And I thought she should be worried, you know, but she knew something I didn't know. He swam out of sight, like I say, and was gone all afternoon, probably 6 hours. And my brother and I kept looking and called, "Where's he gone?" My mother said, "He'll be all right." And about 6 hours later, he came walking up the road, swinging that bathing cap. He had swam 20 miles down the beach and caught a bus back.
Wow.
And of course, I had to ask him, "You did what?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "How? I didn't even know you could swim." He said, "Well, I couldn't until I got in the Navy." And I said, "I thought you were in the Merchant Marine." He said, "Well, before that, I was in the Navy." And he told me the story when he got to Pearl Harbor. He had learned to swim, and he thought, "Well, I'm going to swim a little bit." So he would swim around in that beautiful water there. And one day he said, "I decided I'm going to swim across the harbor." And he did. And then he got to where he could swim across and back. And his buddy that he wound up going to Worcester with started swimming with him, and they would swim long distance. I said, "What's the furthest you ever swam?" He said, "No, I don't know, 25 miles, I guess." And I knew the English Channel was 24 miles, and I thought, no, wow. I said, "How in the world do you swim that far?" When I was older and had been swimming a lot myself, I said, "How do you do that?" He said, "After about 3 miles, you get your second wind, and you feel like you can swim forever." I said, "Second wind?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "When you're working hard, sometimes if you just stay with it, you'll all of a sudden you'll get loosened up and you'll feel like you can go on forever. Well, he was building houses, and he had left me there to be a carpenter's helper, and my job was to pick up shingle scraps and that sort of thing. And he came up one day, and I was laying over in the shady side of the house with my shovel and my rake laying there beside me. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm waiting for my second wind." He said, "Doesn't work that way, son." He said, "The only way it works is for you to keep working until you get it." So years later, this became the title song of my third CD. Pocatello Motor Lodge, room 23, eating pizza on the bed while you're watching the TV. You stopped in to take a breather. Well, it's been 3 weeks. Your feet are growing to the ground, my friend, while you're waiting for your second wind. You might as well be locked up in some dark and lonely jail. It's holding up here in this Idaho motel. Put on them traveling shoes, the ones you wear so well, before they notify your next of kin and find you waiting for your second wind. Everybody needs to catch their breath now and again, to look at where you're headed and to look at where you've been. But if you sit too long, that old rocking chair will win, while you're waiting for your second wind. While you're waiting for your second wind. How many days since you've seen the sky? How many days till you've forgotten how to fly? How many chances do you think you get to try? Don't let them roll the credits at the end and find you waiting for your second wind. Everybody needs to catch their breath now and again, to look at where you're headed and look at where you've been. But if you sit too long, that old rocking chair will win, while you're waiting for your second wind. While you're waiting for your second wind.
Michael, I absolutely love how you can take messages from your family, from your father, and then make that into both a story and a song. You're quite creative and clever.
Well, it's there for everyone. It's just learning how to look for it, and put it together. I mean, everybody's got stories as good as my stories. They just hadn't put them together yet.
Well, I may have some stories, but I sure can't play the guitar or sing like you can. So my hat's off to you. Let me ask you a question about kids. Do you tell stories to kids? You mentioned earlier that you like telling to adults, and children can be a little different. Tell us.
Of course they are. But David was right. Storytelling is is the only art form I know of that you have to be able to not only be good at it, but they assume you're able to teach it, for one thing. So you do workshops at a lot of festivals. They just ask, which workshop of yours do you want to do? Not do you want to do one? And of course, like I say, they get grants and put you in the schools, or like some festivals bring them in, like at Timpanogos, they bring them in at Athens Storytelling Festival in Athens, Alabama. They bring 9,000 kids in over the week, and you tell stories to kids. And of course, the thing about kids is not all, kids' story level changes as they grow older. So you have to have material for K through 3, and the young ones. Carmen Agraditi has been a great help to me in that world, because, as you know, she's children's book author and publisher, editor. She's the one that taught me little kids want something to say back to you. So you sing songs to them, give them things they can be a part of. And then by the time they get to about 10, they get abstract concept, which means you can tell them jokes. They get the punchline now. So now you can start being funny to them without just being visually funny, goofy. They start to get humor at that age. Then by the time they get in middle school, they're like, they want to be with each other. They don't want to listen to you. So you have to find things, again, funny things. Humor breaks down so many barriers. If you can be funny to them, self-deprecating humor. Hey, this is how stupid I was when I was your age. And then high schoolers, you just got to come out with your guns blazing. You got to blow up mailboxes and all that. So yeah, I've learned to work with kids. And the first kids show I ever did were fourth graders in Hendersonville, North Carolina, to grammar school. They brought both fourth grade classes together in the library. They were all sitting around at my feet, looking at me, going, "What's this going to be?" And I thought back to David Holt, and the first thing I said was underwear, and they all went, "Yeah!" And I had them, That was
it. There's some good advice there.
I've learned. I don't have children, and I've not really been around many children in my life. I saw my brother's kids, twice a year or something like that. But through, just being thrown into the fire, and wonderful people like Carmen and people like David, that, and knowing about Gwenda Ledbetter and people like that, that would give you advice, just learned.
Well, you done good by it, my man. You done good. We're talking about children, which always brings me to the concept of the future. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. Whenever I see Louise, I think about the future. What does the future hold for storytelling?
We talked about this a little bit once before, I know. There'll always be storytelling. It might, and I don't think it's going to be what you and I think of as storytelling, festivals and that. People want to hear people their own age. The people who are listening to Donald Davis are our age, and they've been listening to him since they were his age earlier on, when he was telling Jack Tales. They've stayed with it. The audience now that I see is the average age is probably in the 60s. People want to hear people their own age. The moth is people in their 40s, in 30s and 40s, and maybe early 50s. Below that, there's a group. There are groups that get together and tell stories about their lives. There'll always be storytelling, but how it's presented may change a lot. It may not be festivals, but people want to hear stories, and they want to hear their own stories. They want to hear stories that they relate to. The reason that it seems like so many of us, Bill Lett, Andy, me, Kim, so many of us that do this, that tell personal stories, it's all nostalgia now. Because that we all tell stories about Bill Lett, him and Skeeter, Donald Davis. Donald's usually 10 and Joe is 8. So our world of storytelling will fade away. I really believe that. There are a few younger people in it, but most people, young people, wouldn't consider them young now. You know, we're getting some young people in it, but they're pushing 40. You know, the youngest national storytellers are 40 something probably. Most of us are in our 60s or 70s. So I think there'll always be storytelling, but it won't be. When I listen to the people that I grew up, my contemporaries in the music world, folk singers and rock and roll singers and country singers, when I listen to them now in concert, when I see them in concert, they're telling stories before their songs. They didn't used to do that, but they found out, just like I did, that the spoken word is so powerful and people want to hear about their favorite singers, Towns Van Zandt or Guy Clark or those guys that were my heroes, you know. I wanted to hear them talk about how they wrote that song, and they did. And more entertainers are doing that. Filmmakers now refer to themselves as storytellers, you know, musicians, storytellers.
It's striving to be a filmmaker, a storyteller on film.
Yeah.
I hear you clearly.
Well, that's that. I think storytelling will be around forever, but it just may not be what we think of as storytelling.
Well, I guess then our charge is to try to bring in younger people into the craft that we know. So right now, while we're still around, we maybe can mentor them, and maybe they'll pick up some of our traditions along the way. I don't know.
They may, but they'll be telling to their contemporaries.
Yeah. Well,
They won't. They're not that interested in our past. They're interested in their past.
yeah, I hear you.
And they're present. They're interested in each other. It's just like we talked about this before the show started. Young people always, we wanted to listen to the Beatles, and we didn't want to listen to Frank Sinatra. Our parents wanted to listen to Frank Sinatra. They thought the Beatles were stupid. It's always been that way since young people got their own culture and their own music. They want to be with their peers, and that's just humanity.
Well, Michael, I've just realized we only have about 8 minutes left. And instead of just answering my questions, I think our audience, I know I would like to hear a little bit more from you, as well as one of your most requested songs, because you're talking about ages now and you're talking about telling stories to our age group. I think you have one that really resonates with our age group, and you might have more. So you got about 8 minutes. It's all yours, my man.
Okay. I'll tell you, a lot of people ask me, being a songwriter and haven't been one for so long, where do you get ideas for songs? I'm 72 now, but when I turned 65, my wife, Joan, fooled me. She had a clandestine email going with fans all over the country. And she had asked me, what do you want to do for your birthday? I said, I want to work. She said, okay, 65 is a big one. I said, I know, Social Security, Medicare, but I want to work. So she booked me in Boone, about an hour from here. I did the show, spotlights in my eyes. I couldn't really see who was in the audience. We left the show. We were going to go spend the night with some friends who live on a farm in Deep Gap, which is where Doc Watson was from, outside Boone. We pulled up into the yard of this house, this farmhouse, and in the pasture are all these cars. And I looked at Joan and I said, Joe Tilson has started selling used cars on his farm. Look at this. Because there are about 20 cars in the pasture. We walked in, surprise. I mean, fans from all over Chicago, all over the country had come for my 65th birthday party. We stayed up all night. We ate a lot. We had a lot of fun. So my 70th birthday was coming up. And she said, what do you want to do for your birthday? I said, I know how this works. I said, let me tell you something. 70 is not like 65. Those with a zero, and especially a 70 went in front of them, whole different deal. I don't want to hear anything about it. I don't want a birthday party. I don't want cards. I don't want presents. I don't even want a cake. Because when I get up on my 70th birthday, I don't want to even be reminded that I'm 70 years old. She said, oh, surely not. Let's not. I said, nope. I don't want any fuss. You can say happy birthday to me once. After that, I don't even want it mentioned. because I didn't want to. I'm 70 years old. I didn't want to hear about it. So here it was coming up my 70th birthday. I woke up that morning and I walked into the kitchen. And I didn't get a cake. And I didn't get a card. I didn't get any I didn't get anything. So I wrote myself this song. My knees both pop like pistol shots. My face has lines and my hands have spots, and my eyebrows look like some old witch's brew. I sip and sure instead of wine. 4:30 is now my supper time. Remind me why I came into this room. I got receding hair, I got receding gums. My doctor can't be 21. When did my favorite snack become a prune? Long underwear, that's how I roll. I once was cool, now I'm just cold. Remind me why I came into this room. Getting old's not for the faint of heart. My resume may soon include greeter at Walmart. Well, I may not have a hip tattoo, but my hip replacement scar is cool. Remind me why I came into this room. My nose is red, my ears are hairy, my cholesterol count is downright scary. I recall when movies came with a cartoon. My sugar's high, my blood pressure's soaring, my back is screaming and my ears are roaring. Remind me why I came into this room. Getting old's not for the faint of heart. You see now my wife don't trust my driving, and I don't trust a fart. Well, it may sound crude, but I could read an entire novel while I pee. Remind me why I came into this room, but you're gonna need to speak up. Remind me why I came into this room.
Oh, yes. Michael, I got to tell you, there's something special about that song for me for this year. This year, I turned 70 the day before the COVID restrictions came in.
Oh my goodness.
And my wife had
2020.
a huge party. We brought in people from all over the country. And that was supposed to be 2 weeks after my birthday. But it all was canceled. So I had the 70th birthday that you wanted, even though I wanted one that was more like the 65th. It was all wiped away. And then this year was our 40th anniversary. That whole celebration was wiped away. So I think what this all tells us, as we age, we have to learn to accommodate.
We
And
did.
that is the gift of aging, is that we are able to accommodate. Now, Michael, we have a couple minutes left. I know you're a visual artist, so let's hear a little bit about your artwork as well.
This is how I've accommodated. I've started doing back to doing my old artwork. You can see the reflection of the camera on there.
Yes.
That's a Mitchell 300 reel. This one I've gotten a lot. Everybody had one of these when you were growing up, didn't you?
Absolutely. Hurricane lamp.
A Coleman lantern. And I do a thing called peghead portraits. I do portraits of people's instruments, guitars, mandolins, fiddles, that sort of thing. And it's all on my website, michaelreno.com. But I've sold probably 20 pieces since the pandemic hit. I've been working on new material, but mostly I spend my days doing that now.
We're about to wrap up here, Michael, but I want to say that again. If people want more information about you, Your website is again,
Just Michael Reno, MICHAELRENO, just like Nevada. MichaelReno.com.
and there they can learn anything about you and
Oh, more
find
than they'd
out
ever
all
want to
your
know.
materials and anything and your artwork. I love it.
Yeah.
Michael, you have been a great guest, and I am
Oh,
so
thanks, Chuck.
grateful that you've agreed to join me. Thank you so much.
My
And
pleasure.
to everyone else, I hope you all had a good new year because now it's 2021. Thanks a lot,
There you go.
everybody. Thank you, Michael. Goodbye.
See ya.